Sometimes transformation doesn't come with fireworks, it comes with silence. A woman may wake up one day and notice that things no longer bother her the same way. People she once chased suddenly feel far away, not out of bitterness, but because her spirit has climbed a different mountain. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. This is not isolation. It is integration. When a woman enters her divine season, she becomes less reactive, more discerning, less talk, more truth, less fear, more faith. Not in external circumstances, but in the deep knowing that something is shifting within. At first, it may confuse others. They will say she's changed. And they're right, but not because she added something. She removed what was never hers. She is not becoming more. She is becoming real. This quiet revolution, this shedding of false roles and unhealed patterns, is the sacred path only she can walk. It cannot be rushed, and it cannot be explained to those who still speak the language of survival, while she is now fluent in peace. So I invite you to sit with this truth. The season of becoming is not loud, it is precise. And when you honor it, everything around you must either rise to meet you or fall away. Let us now explore this path, not with force, but with presence. Welcome to self-mastery, your space for real wisdom and inner growth. Subscribe and remember our name, self-mastery, because others may copy the voice, but the truth lives here. Let us begin. There is a particular moment in a woman's life when the noise begins to fade, and she no longer feels the urgency to prove herself, explain herself, or even defend her choices. She finds herself sitting in a room, perhaps alone, perhaps surrounded by others, but there is a deep and unshakable quiet rising within her. And this silence isn't empty. It's full of answers that were always waiting underneath the surface, beneath the constant striving and the voices of comparison. This is not the kind of stillness that is imposed from outside, like when life slows down because of external circumstances. It is the kind that arises from within because she has finally stopped resisting her own evolution. At this stage, many women begin to experience something unfamiliar: peace without permission. There is no longer the need for validation, applause, or attention. Even the desire to be seen is different. It no longer stems from lack, but from presence, from completeness. This is the first sign that something divine is unfolding. The paradox of this divine season is that the transformation starts so subtly, many don't even realize it's happening. But she feels it, a shift in energy, a deeper breath, a longer pause before responding, a softer heart that doesn't harden in the presence of misunderstanding. Her words become fewer, but more potent. Her movements less frantic, more deliberate. She walks slower, not because she is tired, but because she is no longer in a race. She understands now. There is no race, only rhythm. Science supports this quiet revolution. Studies in neuroscience show that regular periods of inner stillness, such as through mindfulness, breath work, or solitude, reduce the activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for emotional reactivity and fear. Simultaneously, the prefrontal cortex, which governs reason, planning, and emotional regulation, becomes more active. What does this mean practically? It means that a woman who embraces stillness actually becomes stronger. She's not just being calm. Her brain is literally rewiring itself for better choices, deeper clarity, and more powerful self-regulation. And this is where many people get it wrong. They think stillness is weakness. They assume silence means defeat. But in truth, it is the beginning of mastery, emotional mastery, relational mastery, and ultimately spiritual mastery. Stillness becomes the ground where a woman begins to see clearly, especially in her relationships. She starts noticing patterns that once seemed invisible. She recognizes the difference between connection and attachment, between attention and respect, between love and control. She sees where she used to respond out of habit, out of fear, out of loneliness. And with this awareness, she begins to make new choices. Not louder choices, but wiser ones. Take the story of Elena, a woman in her mid-50s who had spent most of her life accommodating others. Her identity was shaped around being needed by her children, her partner, even her co-workers. She didn't know who she was without the demands of others defining her worth. But one day, after a particularly overwhelming emotional episode, she simply sat still. She turned off the noise. No music, no phone, no distractions, just silence. At first, it was unbearable. The silence confronted her with her own emptiness. But gradually, she began to feel something different, spaciousness. She began to see that her constant need to fix everything around her was not compassion. It was compulsion, a way to distract herself from fixing what was broken within. In that silence, Elena began to reclaim herself. From that day forward, she changed. Not dramatically, but steadily. She didn't explain her new boundaries to everyone. She didn't try to convince people of her worth. She just stopped abandoning herself. And in doing so, the relationships that could not respect her silence slowly faded. The ones that could meet her there deepened. This is the hallmark of the divine season. The outside world may look like it's falling apart. But inside, a woman is coming home to herself. Stillness, however, is not the end of the journey. It is the gate. Once this gate is crossed, another transformation begins. The emotional gravity shifts. Where she once sought love, she now radiates it. Where she once tried to please, she now chooses alignment. This is not about becoming cold or detached. Quite the opposite. She becomes more loving, but less needy. More generous, but less sacrificing. She no longer pours herself out until she is empty. She offers from a place of fullness. This change is profound, especially in her relationships. It might first appear as distance. She's not texting as often. She's not always available. She no longer says yes out of guilt or fear. But if you look closer, you'll see it's not distance, it's depth. She is no longer reacting from emotional survival. She is responding from emotional sovereignty. From a psychological perspective, this shift is tied to what is known as internal validation. When a person, especially a woman who has been socially conditioned to prioritize others, begins to derive her sense of worth from her inner truth rather than external approval, everything changes. Her nervous system settles, her anxiety reduces, her decision-making becomes clearer. She stops over-apologizing. She stops shrinking, and because she no longer needs to be liked by everyone, she becomes infinitely more authentic, more magnetic. This is not just theory. It plays out every day. Consider the example of Amina, a woman in her early 40s, who had spent years trying to gain the affection of a partner who gave her breadcrumbs of attention, but never the consistency of commitment. For years, she justified his emotional distance, telling herself he was just busy or not expressive. But during her divine season, something shifted. She didn't suddenly stop loving him. She just started loving herself more. And with that, her energy changed. She stopped initiating every conversation. She stopped twisting herself to be easier or less demanding. She began investing her emotional energy into herself, into journaling, walking, meditating, and reconnecting with old hobbies. Within weeks, the dynamic changed. The man noticed. His texts became more frequent, his tone more respectful. But Amina saw through it now. It wasn't love, just the discomfort of losing control. And for the first time, she didn't react. She responded with silence, not out of spite, but out of peace. Her peace had become more valuable than his approval. This is what it means to move from seeking to radiating. People can feel the difference in your presence. You are no longer looking for someone to complete you. Because you are no longer fragmented. You carry yourself differently, not with arrogance, but with knowing. You speak differently, not to impress, but to express. You love differently, not to be chosen, but because love itself has become your nature, not your currency. This kind of energy cannot be faked. It is cultivated. It comes through stillness, through reflection, through choosing solitude over shallow companionship, through turning inward, not to escape, but to understand, to recalibrate. In Eastern traditions, this process is often called the return to the true self. Not the self that was shaped by pain, pressure, or performance, but the self that existed before the world told her who she should be. And once she begins to live from this place, people sense it. Some will be drawn closer. They'll be curious about her peace. They'll want to know how she holds herself with such softness and strength. But others will pull away, not because she did anything wrong, but because they are not ready for the version of her that no longer entertains dysfunction. And this is important in her divine season. A woman must learn to let go with grace. Not everything lost is a failure. Sometimes what falls away is simply out of resonance with who she is becoming. She no longer begs for space in places that dim her light. She no longer explains her silence to those who only understand noise. This inner transformation is both subtle and powerful. It may not be visible in material achievements right away, but internally, the architecture of her life is being rebuilt. From scarcity to sufficiency, from fear to faith, from noise to knowing. Each morning, she rises not just to meet the world, but to meet herself. To ask, what is true for me today? What do I need to stay rooted? What must I release to remain aligned? She no longer carries the entire emotional weight of her relationships. She allows others to take responsibility for their part. She stops micromanaging love. She stops performing for acceptance. And slowly, she becomes her own sanctuary. This isn't the loud, performative confidence that the world often celebrates. It's a quieter kind of power. The kind that doesn't need to convince anyone. The kind that can walk away without slamming the door. The kind that can say, this is not for me, without bitterness, just clarity. And that clarity is priceless. It allows her to rest. To rest not just physically, but emotionally. She doesn't rehearse imaginary conversations in her mind anymore. She doesn't carry unspoken disappointments. She speaks truth with tenderness. She listens without absorbing everything. She loves without losing herself. This is not the result of luck or privilege. It is the result of inner work, of choosing healing over hiding, of choosing growth over guilt, of choosing presence over performance. And so, as she continues to evolve, her relationships evolve with her. Not always immediately, not always easily, but inevitably. Because energy never lies, and the energy of a woman who has entered her divine season is unmistakable. It is calm yet commanding, soft yet unshakable, quiet yet deeply heard. The world begins to respond differently, not because the world changed, but because she did. Because her center is no longer external. It lives within, and everything in her life now orbits around that center. Not in chaos, but in harmony. And that is where the next evolution begins. There comes a time when a woman realizes that her body is no longer something separate from her spirit. It is not just a shell to decorate, to criticize, or to push past. It is a sacred vessel, a reflection of her consciousness. During her divine season, this understanding deepens. The body becomes more than a physical form. It becomes a mirror. Every choice she makes, from the food she eats, to the way she breathes, to how she moves or rests, begins to shape her emotional and energetic state. She starts to understand that the body doesn't lie. While the mind can rationalize chaos and tolerate misalignment, the body quietly stores every unresolved feeling, every suppression, every betrayal of self. And eventually, it speaks. What most people don't realize is that long before the body breaks down, it whispers. The tension in her shoulders, the fatigue that doesn't go away, the restless sleep, the digestive issues. These are not random, they are signals. And when a woman enters her divine season, she no longer dismisses these messages. She listens. She understands that healing is not just emotional or spiritual. It is cellular. There is a kind of reverence that arises in this stage. She no longer eats carelessly because she knows that food is information, not just fuel. It tells the body what to build, what to repair, what to destroy. She no longer pushes herself to exhaustion in the name of productivity because she knows that rest is not laziness, it is restoration. She no longer forces herself into environments that drain her because she knows that her nervous system is sacred and protecting it is wisdom, not weakness. Scientific research confirms this intuitive wisdom. When women practice somatic awareness, connecting with their body through breath, movement, or stillness, they activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which governs rest, digestion, and healing. This allows the body to shift out of survival mode. Cortisol levels drop. Inflammation reduces. Hormonal balance begins to return. She feels more grounded, more alive, more herself. Not because she added more to her life, but because she removed what was harming her silently. In this season, even her posture changes. She no longer shrinks herself to be less visible, nor stiffens to protect herself from being hurt. Her spine straightens, but her shoulders soften. She walks as though she belongs, because she finally feels that she does, in her own body, in her own life. There's a story of a woman named Liana, who spent most of her youth disconnected from her body. As a child, she had been praised for her academic excellence and obedience, but no one taught her how to feel. Emotions were something to suppress, not explore. Her body became something she ignored unless it failed her. Years of ignoring discomfort turned into chronic fatigue, anxiety, and emotional numbness. One day, after collapsing from exhaustion in the middle of a meeting, she was forced to stop. She took a sabbatical, not just from work, but from the persona she had built. And in that quiet space, she began to ask questions she had never asked. What does my body need? What does it remember? What have I been carrying that was never mine? She started practicing gentle yoga, not for weight loss, not for aesthetics, but to feel. She cried in poses that released deep tension. She changed the way she ate, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. She walked barefoot on the earth, not because it was a trend, but because it made her feel connected again. Slowly, she began to understand her divine season was not about chasing a goal, it was about returning to wholeness. As her body healed, so did her relationships. She began setting boundaries, not just with people, but with her own habits. She stopped overextending. She stopped consuming content that made her feel less. Then, she stopped engaging in conversations that drained her. Her relationships became cleaner. Less drama, more depth. Less performance, more presence. This inner shift brought her to another powerful realization, that every time she said yes to something that dishonored her body, she was saying no to herself. And every time she honored her body, she was telling her spirit, I trust you. That level of integrity began to rewire her self-worth, not just as a concept, but as a lived experience. This is the quiet power of embodiment. It's not about having the perfect routine or becoming a wellness expert. It's about living in a way that respects your rhythm. It's about knowing when to push and when to pause, when to speak and when to breathe. It's about remembering that your body holds every chapter of your story and that healing is not forgetting, but integrating. As this reverence deepens, something else begins to emerge. a woman starts to notice the sacredness of her choices. Not just what she puts into her body, but what she allows into her life. And this brings us into another essential transformation. Her yes becomes sacred. There is a profound shift when a woman no longer says yes from fear, guilt, or the desire to be liked. She no longer offers her time, her energy, or her body as a currency for connection. She understands now that every yes is a seed, and if she's not careful, she will grow gardens of obligation instead of fields of alignment. At this stage, the quality of her relationships undergoes a transformation. She no longer engages with people just because of history or obligation. She no longer entertains conversations that leave her feeling smaller. She doesn't say yes to events, relationships, or responsibilities that pull her away from her center. Not because she's closed off, but because she's finally open to herself. This is where many people begin to misunderstand her. They may say she's changed, that she's become difficult or distant. But what they're really noticing is her clarity. And for those who once benefited from her confusion, her clarity will feel like rejection. But it's not. It's just truth. Her truth. This kind of boundary setting is not loud. It doesn't come with drama or long explanations. It is subtle, clean, and firm. A quiet no, a graceful exit, a delayed reply, an inner decision that no longer needs external approval. And this isn't about becoming selfish. It's about becoming aligned. Behavioral science supports this clarity. When a person begins to live from internal values, rather than social pressure or emotional reactivity, they experience less decision fatigue, less resentment, and more fulfillment. Boundaries become not barriers, but bridges to a more authentic, sustainable life. Take the example of Marisol, a mother of 3 and a community volunteer who always said yes. Yes to every school event. Yes to every favor. Yes to every emotional dumping session from friends. She wore her exhaustion like a badge of honor. Until one day, her daughter asked, "Why are you always too tired to play with me?" That question pierced through every justification she had. She realized she had become so available to the world that she was unavailable to herself and to the people who truly mattered. From that day, she began to choose differently. She started small, one no at a time. She stopped picking up the phone during dinner. She delegated tasks. She let go of friendships that were built on obligation, not reciprocity. And though the transition was uncomfortable, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace that comes from everything going right, but the peace that comes from finally doing what is right for you. This is the power of sacred decision making. A woman learns that her time is a non-renewable resource, that her energy is currency, that her presence is a gift, not a given. And once she starts living this way, her life becomes more intentional, less cluttered, more aligned. She no longer runs herself, ragged trying to be everything to everyone. She becomes everything to herself, and from that place, she offers what is true. In relationships, this changes the dynamic completely. She stops chasing connection. She stops explaining her worth. She no longer fears being misunderstood because she understands herself. And in understanding herself, she naturally attracts those who understand her too, or are willing to try. And even when misunderstandings arise, she no longer pleads to be seen. She knows that being unseen by the wrong people is not a loss. It's a redirection. A reminder that not everyone deserves access to her sacred yes. This kind of emotional discipline doesn't come from pride. It comes from practice, from the daily habit of checking in with herself. Is this choice aligned with my peace? Is this invitation in harmony with my values? Is this relationship supporting or depleting my growth? And if the answer is no, she releases without guilt, because she knows that every yes she gives from fear is a betrayal.